Worthless girl, you'll never be more than a servant in this house. If not for us, you'd be rotting on the streets. Those were the words my stepmother and stepsisters threw at me every day, and I was too young to fight back. My childhood ended the moment my mother died, and from then on, my life became nothing but pain, silence, and survival. But my very existence was a threat to them, and they made a decision to take me out forever. What they didn't know was that fate had a way of turning tables. Before we begin this story of betrayal, love, and revenge, please do me a favor. Kindly like, subscribe, and share, because you won't want to miss what comes next. Also, drop a comment of where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far my story goes. The day my mother died, my whole world cracked open. I was 11. Old enough to know she wasn't coming back, too young to understand how I was supposed to live without her. I still remember how quiet the house felt afterward. It was like the walls themselves had stopped breathing. No more soft humming while she cooked. No more gentle hands brushing the hair out of my eyes. Just silence. My father, Elias, tried. He really did. For a while he held me tighter than ever, like he was afraid I might vanish too. He burned meals in the kitchen but still placed them on the table with a smile. He walked me to school and held my hand a little too firmly, as if letting go might mean losing me too. Sometimes he even tried to braid my hair. His big fingers were clumsy, and the braids always looked like tangled ropes, but I laughed anyway. He laughed too, though I could see the tiredness in his eyes. But as the months passed, the laughter faded. I would creep out of bed late at night and find him sitting at the table, staring at stacks of bills, whispering my mother's name under his breath. His shoulders always looked like they carried more than one man should. I wanted to hug him, to tell him I missed her too, but the words never came out right. And then she came. Helena. I'll never forget the first time I saw her. My father brought her home one evening, dressed better than I'd seen him in months. He even combed his hair, which told me this was serious. She walked in with her 2 daughters, Lucinda and Marielle, trailing behind her like little shadows. To the neighbors, Helena looked like an angel, tall, graceful, with a smile that seemed to promise she would heal a broken home. They whispered about how lucky my father was to have found her. But I knew better. From the moment her eyes met mine, cold and calculating, I knew I had just lost my father too. At first it was little things. Aria, be a dear and wash the dishes. Aria, sweep the floor, your sisters are tired. Aria, you'll sleep in the attic. The girls need proper rooms. I tried to tell my father, but every time Helena was there with her sweet, poisonous words. Oh, Elias, don't scold her. She's only adjusting. She doesn't mean to complain. She would stroke his arm, her voice dripping with fake kindness, and my father would sigh and tell me not to exaggerate. I stopped trying after a while. Nights in the attic were the worst. The roof leaked when it rained, and the wind howled through the cracks. The blanket I had was thin, barely covering my legs. I'd curl up in the corner, shivering, whispering to myself the words my mother once told me, "You are my brightest star." But the stars didn't feel so bright when I could hear Helena and her daughters downstairs, laughing around the dinner table, their plates clinking, their voices cheerful, while I stayed hidden away. I cried a lot in those nights, but always into my pillow, muffling the sound. I didn't want them to hear. I didn't want Helena to smile that satisfied smile she wore whenever I looked broken. So I learned to be quiet, to hide my pain, to make silence my shield. If I spoke up, Helena twisted my words. If I complained, my father grew frustrated. So I swallowed everything and told myself kindness was the only weapon I had left. Even when Lucinda and Marielle mocked me for my clothes, I bit my tongue. Even when Helena piled chore after chore on me, I lowered my head and did them. Some nights I told myself maybe, just maybe, if I stayed good enough, patient enough, my father would finally see the truth. But he never did. As the years passed, his distance grew, and the bond I once had with him turned into nothing more than a memory. By the time I turned 18, I had already accepted that I didn't have a family anymore. Not really. And that was when Helena's plan began to unfold. A plan so cruel it would change my life forever. Because Helena didn't just want me silenced, she wanted me gone. By the time I turned 18, Helena's hatred for me had become something I could feel in the air. It was in the way her eyes narrowed whenever I walked into a room, the way her lips curled whenever someone compared me to my mother, and the way she gave me chores that grew harsher by the day. To her, I wasn't a daughter. I wasn't even family. I was a shadow in her house, a reminder that my father had once loved another woman, and worse, I was the true heir to the little property my mother left behind, something Helena could never forgive me for. Her daughters, Lucinda and Marielle, weren't any better. They had everything: fine clothes, perfume, shoes that sparkled. Yet they looked at me with jealousy I couldn't understand. I wore second-hand dresses that barely fit, patched up more times than I could count. But still, they whispered about how unfair it was that I had inherited my mother's beauty. "You think being pretty will save you?" Lucinda sneered one day as I scrubbed the floor. "Wait until you're too old and wrinkled, then you'll be nothing." Marielle laughed and kicked the bucket of water, splashing dirty water all over me. I bit my tongue and stayed quiet. Silence was safer. But Helena wasn't satisfied with small cruelties. She wanted me gone. I started hearing rumors in town, whispers that came back to me in hushed voices. People said I was a burden on my family, that I was ungrateful, that I had no prospects and would shame my father one day. I knew where those words came from: Helena's lips. She was planting seeds, making sure when she finally got rid of me, no one would question it. And then, one evening, she struck. I was folding laundry when she called me into the sitting room. Her daughters sat there smirking like they already knew a secret I didn't. My father was in his chair, looking tired, his face lined with stress. Helena's voice was dripping with sweetness when she said, "Arya, a noble family has chosen you." I frowned, confused. "Chosen me for what?" Her smile widened. "They want to take you into their home. They're not rich, but they're right for you. Their son, he needs a wife. And they believe you are the perfect match." My heart sank. I had heard the whispers about that family. Their only son, Adrian, had been in a terrible accident. Some said he couldn't walk, others said he couldn't speak. Most believed he was little more than a breathing shell, a man who might never truly wake again. I shook my head, panic rising in my chest. "No, you can't mean that. I can't marry someone I don't know, someone who—" I couldn't even finish the sentence, but Helena's smile never wavered. "Consider it an honor, child. Most families would envy such an arrangement." "Honor?" My voice cracked. "You're sending me away to live with a man who may never even—" "Enough!" Helena's tone snapped like a whip. She turned to my father, and I saw tears glistening in her eyes. "Elias, she doesn't understand. I only want what's best for her. She will have a roof over her head, food to eat, a family to belong to. Isn't that better than wasting away here when no other man wants her?" I stared at her, stunned. Those tears, they weren't real, I knew it. But my father didn't. He rubbed his forehead, looking more worn down than ever, and whispered, "Maybe Helena is right, Arya. Maybe this is best." My chest felt like it was splitting open. "Papa, no. Please, don't let her do this to me." But he couldn't even look me in the eyes. Helena turned back to me, her smile sharp as glass. "You will do this, Arya. You have no choice." I wanted to scream, to run, to fight. But the truth pressed down on me like chains. I had no money, no allies, nowhere to go. Helena held all the power, and my father was too broken to protect me. That night, I lay awake in the attic, staring at the ceiling through the cracks. Rain leaked in, cold drops landing on my face, but I didn't move. My mind kept circling the same thought: they were sending me away. Sending me to marry a man the world called a ghost. I whispered to myself, just like I used to when I was little, "You are my brightest star." But even those words felt hollow now. Because I knew the truth. Helena didn't just want me silenced. She wanted me erased. And the marriage she was forcing me into, it felt like the grave she had dug for me with her own hands. I used to dream of my wedding day when I was a little girl. I thought it would be full of music and laughter, with flowers braided into my hair and my mother's hands fixing the veil. I imagined love, the kind that makes your heart beat too fast, the kind that makes you forget the world. But my wedding day was nothing like that. The church smelled faintly of old candles and dust, not roses or celebration. Guests sat stiffly on polished benches, their eyes flicking toward me with pity. I could feel like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. Every whispered word reached my ears, though no one said it loudly. Poor thing, marrying a half-dead man, such a waste of beauty. I pretended not to hear. I had learned long ago how to keep my face still, how not to let tears fall in front of Helena and her daughters. Lucinda and Marielle stood tall on either side of me, their gowns of soft silk catching the candlelight like water. They looked radiant, as if it was their day, not mine. Their lips curved in little smiles, the kind that weren't truly smiles at all but sharp knives wrapped in ribbon. Every time I glanced at them, their eyes sparkled with delight, not for me but for my misery. And then there was me. The dress I wore still carried the faint perfume of Helena. It had once been hers. I could tell by the way it was too loose in some places, too tight in others, as though the fabric itself resisted belonging to me. The lace was yellowed with age, the hem brushed unevenly across the stone floor, and the veil scratched at my scalp where Helena had pinned it in too tightly. I tried to stand tall, to hold some piece of dignity, but inside I felt small. Then my eyes moved to him, my groom. Adrian sat slumped in his wheelchair near the altar, his head tilted slightly, his eyes half shut as if he was caught between worlds. His hands rested limp on the armrest, fingers curled weakly inward. He did not move when the priest spoke, nor when his family, elegantly dressed, unreadable faces, looked on. He looked like a shadow of a man, not a man himself. The pity in the room grew thicker, almost choking me. Everyone thought the same thing, that I was being tied to a body without life, that my future ended here at this altar, bound to silence and stillness. And perhaps they were right. When the priest asked me to say my vows, my throat tightened. The words trembled inside me. This was not love, not choice, not freedom. This was a cage Helena had shoved me into and locked from the outside. But as I looked at Adrian, at the way his chest rose and fell slowly, at the faintest flicker of light in his unfocused eyes, I felt something stir inside me. Compassion. I knew what it was to be trapped. I knew what it was to have no voice, no one who truly listened. If this man was to remain this way for the rest of his life, if this was to be my fate, then I would not be cruel. I would not treat him as Helena had treated me. So I whispered my vows. I will not abandon you, I said softly, so only he could hear. You are my husband now, and I will honor you. The room felt heavier after my words, though no one noticed. Lucinda stifled a laugh behind her bouquet. Helena's lips curled in a satisfied smile, her plan completed. My father... He only bowed his head, weary eyes clouded with something between guilt and defeat. I stood there, heart aching, not knowing if the man before me could even understand what I had promised. Not knowing that, beneath those half-closed lids, Adrian's eyes weren't as empty as they seemed. I didn't see the faint twitch at the corner of his mouth, nor the tiny tightening in his fingers. I didn't know he was listening, watching, waiting, and testing me. Adrian's house didn't feel like home. The ceiling stretched so high above me that my footsteps echoed whenever I walked down the marble halls. The windows were tall and heavy with curtains, keeping most of the sunlight out. Even the air felt cold, as if the walls themselves refused to warm up. The servants were polite but distant. They lowered their heads when they passed me, their faces stiff and unreadable. At first I thought they pitied me, the poor bride married to a man who could not even look at her. Later I realized they were afraid of me too, not because of who I was, but because of who he was, Adrian, their master. They treated him as though he were already gone. But I couldn't. Every morning I went to his room. His body was always still, slumped against the cushions of his chair or lying in bed, his eyes half shut, his lips motionless. Some days it felt like I was speaking to a ghost, but I refused to stay silent. "Good morning, Adrian," I would say, opening the curtains so light could spill across the room. "It looks like a fine day. Shall we sit in the garden?" Of course, he never answered. Still, I wheeled him outside, letting the wind touch his face, the sunlight warm his pale skin. I began to read to him, too. Old books I found in the library, poetry, even newspapers. My voice would fill the stillness of the room, and though he didn't blink or stir, I pretended he listened. Sometimes I combed his hair, smoothing it gently away from his forehead. Other times I tucked the blanket around him, careful not to let him get cold. When storms shook the mansion at night and thunder rolled across the sky, I found myself creeping back into his room. I would sit at his bedside, whispering softly. "You're not alone," I told him. "I'm here." And in those moments I wasn't sure who I was comforting, him or myself. The servants noticed. At first, they shook their heads at me, murmuring that I was wasting my youth on a body that could not respond. But slowly, their glances softened, their whispers changed. "This girl has a heart of gold," I overheard one of them say. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of dignity. Not because Helena would ever praise me, she never would, but because someone finally saw me as more than a burden. Back in my father's house, Helena and her daughters gloated over their triumph. I could almost hear their laughter in my mind. They thought I was trapped, miserable, locked into silence and loneliness. And in some ways they were right. But something was changing. I couldn't explain it, but sometimes when I was speaking to Adrian, I felt the weight of his gaze. His eyes might have been half closed, but there were moments I was certain he was looking at me. Truly looking. Once, when I leaned close to tuck the blanket under his chin, I thought I saw the corner of his lips twitch. Not a full smile, just a flicker. My breath caught, but when I blinked, it was gone. Another night, while I hummed a tune beside him during a storm, I felt the faintest movement beneath the blanket. A finger twitch, like a ripple on still water. I told myself it was my imagination. It had to be. And yet, deep inside, I knew it wasn't. Adrian was listening. And worse, he was waiting. Adrian was not the broken shell the world believed him to be. After the accident that nearly took his life, his body had healed far more than anyone knew. He could walk when he chose to, speak when he wanted, even lift a glass to his lips. But he had grown disgusted with people, and disgust cut deeper than any wound. When the car crashed, he learned quickly how fragile loyalty was. The women who once clung to his arm vanished within days. Friends he had laughed with turned their backs the moment the doctors whispered vegetative. Relatives he had barely spoken to appeared like shadows, circling his father's estate with greedy eyes, already fighting over his inheritance as if he were already in the grave. Their betrayal burned into him. If money and status were all that tied people to him, then he wanted no part of them. It was then he and his father made a plan. Adrian would remain silent, still, and helpless in the eyes of the world. Let them show their true colors. Let them think him useless. If anyone still stayed, it would be because they saw him, not the heir, not the fortune, not the name. So when Helena's proposal arrived, to give her stepdaughter in marriage to a man as good as dead, Adrian almost laughed. Another trap, he thought, another selfish pawn tossed his way. He had seen women like Helena's daughters, sharp smiles, hungering for gold. He expected the same from Arya. But Arya was different. She did not arrive demanding jewels or new gowns. She did not sneer at him the way so many had done behind his back. Instead, she sat by his chair with a quiet dignity that unsettled him. At first he thought it was pity. But pity fades fast. Days passed and still she came to him. She combed his hair, smoothed the creases in his blanket, and read books aloud with a soft voice that filled the cold halls with warmth. Her laughter was rare but real, bubbling out when she stumbled on a funny passage, or when the servants whispered something kind to her. That sound was so pure that Adrian found himself straining, fighting not to smile, not to give himself away. What stunned him most were her prayers. Late at night, when she thought no one was listening, Arya knelt by his bedside. She clasped her hands, her voice trembling but sincere. "Please, God," she whispered, "heal him. Not for me, but for him. Let him have his life back. Let him feel joy again." Adrian's throat tightened the first time he heard her. No woman had ever prayed for him, not like that. Not without asking for something in return. Each night she ended the same way, leaning close enough for him to feel the warmth of her breath. "Good night, Adrian." Those 2 words should have been simple, but they pierced through the walls he had built around himself, and his cold, bitter heart started to thaw. Days turned into weeks, weeks stretched into months. By then, I had grown used to the silence. It was my routine. Open the curtains, speak to him as if he could hear, read, pray, sit by his side until the sun set. But that morning was different. I bent down to adjust the blanket across his lap, tucking it neatly the way I always did. My fingers brushed against his hand. And then, his fingers twitched. I froze. My heart hammered so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I blinked hard, telling myself it was nothing, a trick of the light maybe. My imagination. But then it happened again. This time, not just a twitch, his lips curved, faint but clear enough. A smile. I stumbled back, covering my mouth with both hands. My throat burned, my eyes filled with tears before I could stop them. "Adrian?" I whispered. My voice was shaking. "Did you?" "No, it can't be." His eyes stayed shut. His head didn't move. If not for that smile, I would have thought I dreamed it. That was the first crack in the wall I thought would never break. From that day on, little changes began to show. A finger moving when I placed a book in his hand, a soft sound in his throat when I read aloud, his eyelids fluttering more often, his gaze lingering on me longer. At first, I was terrified. Was I losing my mind, seeing things I desperately wanted to see? But the truth was undeniable. He was waking up, and then, one night, it happened. I had finished reading a poem and closed the book gently. I leaned close, whispering as I always did, "Good night, Adrian," and then I heard it, soft, barely audible. A single word. "Good night." I froze, staring at him, every nerve in my body alight. You spoke," I breathed. He didn't open his eyes, but the corner of his mouth curved again. The next morning I sat by his side, waiting, hoping, praying, and he did it again, this time clearer. "Water," he whispered. I nearly fell over myself pouring him a glass, my hands shaking as I held it to his lips. He sipped slowly, his throat moving, and tears ran down my face. You're really coming back," I cried. Day by day his voice grew stronger. At first just single words, then full sentences, though still quiet and broken. The staff could hardly believe it. Some crossed themselves, whispering about miracles. Then came the therapy. I wheeled him into the private room where doctors stretched his legs, helping him stand, step by step. His hands gripped mine tighter than I expected, his skin warm and alive. I cheered him on, every stumble, every win, as though each was my own. And then, the day arrived. I was helping him into the study when he stopped, placing a hand on the armrest of his chair. Slowly, with effort, he pushed himself up. His knees wobbled, but they held. My breath caught. He stood, on his own. I pressed my hand against my mouth, choking on a sob. "Adrian, you're standing!" He looked at me then, really looked at me. His eyes, no longer dull and half-closed, but sharp, alive, filled with something I couldn't name. And then, in a voice that was no longer weak but steady, he said, "Arya, you gave me more than care. You gave me reason." I felt my knees weaken beneath me. My throat tightened. I had no words. No one had ever said something like that to me. Not my father, not Helena, not anyone. For so long I had been told I was a burden, a mistake, a shadow that should be erased. And now here was a man, standing on his own 2 feet, telling me that I was the reason he found strength again. My lips trembled. I wanted to answer, but no words came out. All I could do was look at him, my heart pounding, my chest aching in ways I didn't understand. He smiled faintly, as though he knew. And in that moment, I realized my life had changed again, only this time not into darkness, but into something I couldn't yet name. I thought I had seen everything, his first smile, his first words, his first step after months of silence. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. It happened one evening in the grand dining room. Adrian's father, a tall man with stern eyes that softened only for his son, asked me to sit. The staff stood unusually still, as if they already knew what was about to unfold. "Arya," he began, "there's something you must know. My son is not only alive and well, he is the heir to our family's empire, a fortune that stretches across countries." The words slammed into me, my breath caught in my throat. I looked at Adrian, my Adrian, the man I had wheeled into gardens, the man I had sung to during storms. "A billionaire?" My voice cracked. He didn't flinch. He only held my gaze, steady and calm. Memories flooded me, Helena's sneers, Lucinda and Marielle's cruel laughter, the whispers of neighbors who said I was cursed for marrying a man as good as dead. They had thought they buried me alive in that marriage. And now, I was his wife, the wife of a man who owned more wealth than I could ever imagine. My hands trembled in my lap. Why didn't you tell me?" Adrian rose from his chair, walking slowly toward me, no longer the weak figure slumped in silence, but strong, alive, his eyes burning with something fierce. He knelt in front of me, his hand gently covering mine. "Because I needed to know," he said softly, "if anyone could love me when I had nothing, no power, no voice, no promise of tomorrow. And then you came." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "But I didn't do anything. You gave me dignity," he cut in. "When the world saw a burden, you saw a man. When I had no voice, you spoke for me. When I was lost, you prayed for me." His fingers tightened on mine. "Arya, wealth means nothing without you. You showed me what love without conditions looks like." The room blurred as tears spilled down my cheeks. For so long I had lived in shadows, believing my worth was less than nothing. And here was a man telling me I was his reason. I pressed my hand against his cheek, trembling. "I never thought anyone would say that to me." He smiled faintly, leaning into my touch. "Get used to it, because I will keep saying it for the rest of our lives." Something warm unfurled in my chest, a fragile joy I had never dared to dream of. But even as I held on to that moment, a shadow crept into my mind. I thought of Helena, of Lucinda and Marielle, the ones who had cast me aside, who had pushed me into this marriage thinking it was my doom. Little did I know that fate was about to bring us face to face again. I never imagined my life would change so much. A year ago, I was scrubbing floors in silence, my hands raw from soap and cold water, while Helena and her daughters laughed in the parlor. Now I was standing in front of the mirror in a silk gown, preparing to walk into a gala with Adrian by my side. The irony wasn't lost on me. When the world found out who Adrian truly was, everything shifted. Reporters, investors, old friends, they all came rushing back to him. But he never let me feel like I was just his shadow. Everywhere we went, he introduced me not as his wife, but as Arya, the woman who saved him. I thought the revenge would be in the wealth itself, that living well would be enough. But Helena didn't know when to stop. She twisted the story in the village. She claimed she had always known Adrian was rich. She said marrying me off to him had been her sacrifice, her gift. She painted herself as a clever woman who had given me a better life. And some people believed her. At least until Adrian's lawyers opened her books. The day her secrets came out was the day I realized how far I had come. The courtroom was small, but it was packed. Helena sat across from us, dressed in gray, her face pale. She tried to keep her chin up, but when the documents were read, records of her taking money from my father's accounts, of her pawning off my mother's heirlooms, of her buying jewelry for herself with funds meant for me, she shrank. The crowd gasped. My father buried his face in his hands. Lucinda and Marielle sat frozen, unable to meet my eyes. Adrian leaned toward me and whispered, "Are you ready for this?" I swallowed. My hands trembled in my lap, but I nodded. Yes. The judge ordered Helena to repay every cent, with interest. It would take everything she had left. Her friends in the room turned their heads, whispering behind their hands. The woman who once ruled every tea party and gathering was now a thief in their eyes. When it was over, Helena tried to reach me. "Arya," she hissed, grabbing my wrist as I passed, her nails dug into my skin. "You think this makes you better than me? You're nothing without his money." For the first time in my life, I looked her in the eye without fear. My voice was steady. "You're wrong. I was something even before this. You just couldn't see it." Her grip loosened. I walked away. The sisters were worse. They still believed beauty would save them, that wealth would shield them. So when Adrian and I hosted our first charity gala, they arrived uninvited, dressed in gowns they could barely afford. I remember the way their heels clicked on the marble floor as they hurried toward me, desperate, smiling too wide. "Arya!" Marielle squealed, loud enough for the entire hall to turn. "Dear sister, how radiant you look. Forgive us," Lucinda added quickly, her lips trembling. "We were jealous. We didn't see your worth then, but we see it now. Please, accept us again." The crowd went quiet, every ear tuned to us. I felt dozens of eyes on me, waiting to see how I would respond. For a moment, the younger version of me wanted to scream. I wanted to remind them of the years they locked me in the attic, the names they called me, the laughter when I wore patched dresses. But then I remembered something my mother used to say: "Don't waste your breath on those who don't deserve it. Let silence do the cutting." So I smiled gently. "Forgiveness? You already have it. But my trust?" That was buried with my mother. Gasps rippled through the room. Lucinda's face drained of color. Marielle's smile faltered, her lips twitching as if to argue. But the crowd had already shifted, no longer charmed, no longer admiring. They saw them for what they were. By the end of the night, the sisters left in shame. No man approached them, no woman greeted them, their names became curses whispered behind champagne glasses. Helena's downfall came slowly after that. Her friends abandoned her, creditors knocked on her door, and one day word reached me that she had been forced to move into the attic of her own house, the same one she had once thrown me into, calling it a servant's place. I should have felt pity, but all I felt was closure. Lucinda and Marielle sold their gowns and jewels just to survive. They were spotted working at small shops, their heads bowed, their laughter gone. Once, I even walked past them on the street. They didn't meet my eyes. They couldn't. And then there was my father. He came to me one evening, his shoulders bent, his eyes red. He looked older than I remembered, broken in a way that had nothing to do with age. "Arya," he said, his voice cracking. "I failed you. I let her control me. I let them hurt you. I was weak." I stood in silence, my heart aching despite everything. "I don't deserve forgiveness," he whispered, "but I am ruined. If you do not help me, I will lose everything. Please, daughter." I closed my eyes. Memories came flooding back, the way he had turned his face when Helena struck me, the way he had let me live like a shadow in my own home. And yet, he was my father. When I opened my eyes, I said softly, "I forgive you, and I will save you from bankruptcy, but things can never go back. You are my father, yes, but you are no longer my protector." Tears filled his eyes. He fell to his knees, but I turned and walked away. Sometimes, late at night, I would lie awake and wonder if revenge had made me cruel. But then Adrian would reach for my hand and whisper, "You gave them mercy, Arya. That is your strength." And he was right. I hadn't screamed, I hadn't struck, I hadn't thrown their pain in their faces. I had simply risen, and in my rise they had fallen. That was the sweetest revenge of all. In the end, I learned something I never expected. Kindness is power. I didn't need to scream, I didn't need to destroy them the way they once tried to destroy me. My dignity and my success were sharper than any blade. Helena, Lucinda, Marielle, they were left with the weight of their own choices. And me? I walked forward, not as the girl who was forced into a loveless marriage, but as a woman who found strength, love, and freedom in the very place they thought I would die. Adrian once told me, "You gave me reason, but truly he gave me wings." And so, the poor girl forced into a loveless marriage became the cherished wife of a man the world thought was broken. She entered the mansion as a victim but emerged as a queen, not because of his billions, but because her heart was priceless. Would you have shown the same kindness if you thought no one was watching? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.